my name is Alex Barnes. I'm an independent energy consultant specializing in energy market design and a visiting research fellow for the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. So the role that carbon pricing plays in the energy transition is really important. Basically, there are two ways to reduce emissions. You can regulate, saying you can't do it, or you can provide economic incentives, and carbon pricing is the way that you do the latter. Basically, if you don't know the cost of emitting carbon, you can't really know what's the most cost-effective way of reducing them. So prices are the signal which make market economies work. And in terms of what is needed for carbon pricing to decarbonize the world's economies, the IEA assumes a carbon price of $63 per ton of carbon by 2025 for advanced economies and $140 per ton of carbon by 2040, and slightly lower numbers for developing economies in its sustainable development scenario. So essentially, we need to start thinking about carbon pricing a lot more than we have been. And this is one of the ways that we can fast track decarbonisation globally, which is to put in more carbon pricing and to increase it gradually over time so that industry and market players have a clear idea where it's going to go. At the moment, less than 25% of global emissions are covered by carbon pricing, according to the World Bank. If you link emissions trading systems, which are a way of setting carbon prices, you can actually get tremendous efficiencies because the cost of reducing emissions vary greatly across sectors and, of course, across countries. So to give you one idea, again, IEA figures show that in terms of reducing emissions, the cost of doing so by improving industrial efficiency can actually be less than zero. In other words, a negative cost, a profit of up to $132 per ton of CO2, but it can cost as much as $153 per ton of CO2. So obviously you can make big gains if you go for the areas where it actually doesn't cost you anything to improve it, to reduce emissions. And the way to do that is to enable companies to trade emissions allowances through an ETS. A couple of other things that need to be done are allowing small consumers, so residential, small commercial, to have a much better idea of how they are going to reduce their energy usage, particularly for heating and cooling. Small consumers very dependent on decisions by others. Unlike a big factory, it's much more difficult for them to change their heating system. They're very dependent on what networks are available, gas and electricity networks. It's also quite costly. So programs for that need to be put in place, given that emissions for heating and cooling account for a very large percentage of overall emissions. And one has to bear in mind that carbon pricing and carbon taxation, for example, is regressive. It will have a disproportionate effect on poorer consumers because, of course, we all need to eat, cook, heat our homes, etc. And so if you have a smaller income, it has a disproportionate effect. There's still an enormous role for coal to gas switching. I mean, Europe could still replace pretty much all its coal-fired generation with existing gas-fired capacity. And that obviously would have a significant impact on reducing emissions. And one example stands out for this. So Germany and the UK both used to be heavily dependent on coal and also have gas in their energy mixes. But over the last few years, what has happened is that the UK has basically got rid of coal from its energy mix in terms of power generation, has only had 5% in 2018, according to the sort of latest figures. And it has a much lower carbon footprint for its power generation than Germany. It's about 50% lower than Germany, or rather Germany is 50% higher. And whereas Germany still has 36% solid fuels in its mix. So there's clearly a lot of role for coal to gas switching. And of course, worldwide, the amount of coal that is used is much, much greater. The other thing that is required is thinking about blue hydrogen. blue hydrogen is basically producing hydrogen from natural gas, which is one of the main ways that hydrogen is produced at the moment, but the emissions are captured and stored. And the reason for doing it is because it can provide instant benefits in terms of decarbonising those sectors which cannot easily electrify. But we can't use green hydrogen, that's hydrogen from electrolysis yet, because simply put, there aren't enough renewables in place. And it doesn't make any sense to use the existing electricity generation of renewables to replace, to provide hydrogen, because of conversion losses. And if you used electricity from the grid, for example, if you used electricity from the German grid, you would actually have a higher carbon footprint than producing hydrogen from natural gas without carbon capture and storage, which would make no sense at all.